Welcome to a new episode of Observability Talk. Through this podcast, we often aim to look at observability from different perspectives. Today, we are glad to introduce you to Sarika Atri. Sarika is a seasoned engineering and technology leader with over 2 decades of experience spanning diverse domains. During her tenure, she has worked with a wide spectrum of system types, ranging from high throughput, low latency distributed systems to event driven, high volume data processing pipelines and machine learning solutions aimed at enhancing data quality. Sarika is one of the co founders at Exemplify.tech. Exemplify is a team of battle hardened architects infusing their expertise in the new age startups. As architects in residence, she and her co founders get in the trenches and work side by side with teams to help them find and achieve their tech product goals. Hi Sarika, a warm welcome to you to Observability Talk.
Hey, thank you so much for having me here. It's a pleasure.
Yeah, so given the wide experience you have had, right, over the years, you have seen application development, deployment have transformed beyond imagination. We started with way back a single server or a 2 tier or a 3 tier server architectures to distributed deployments to serverless architecture now. I want to kick off this podcast with asking you to share your fascinating journey, starting way back sometime in 2000 with this 2 tier, 3 tier based application developments and deployments to now a serverless architecture development and deployment.
Yeah, that's a very interesting thing. When I look back at when I started in the industry, my first couple of projects that I worked on were desktop applications. I started with Adobe. We were building tools for creative artists, and these tools, while they were monoliths, they were fairly complex, extremely modular, very good interfaces between modules and so on. But they were built on a CD and shipped quite literally. Right. So I started my journey back then when we had to burn CDs and ship them out. So the development and the release cycles were fairly long. We were doing releases once in a year, once in 2 years, like that long. Because you couldn't fix things once you've shipped it. So you had to be really, really, really careful about testing and making sure there are no bugs that we were shipping out. From there, I moved to chip design software in the EDA space, the electronic design automation space. These were softwares that were still running on-prem on servers of our clients, and a single application was running in a single server, right? There were no multi-server support and things like that. Things were a little different. We were shipping patches frequently because we could ship them over the wire and their teams could install it on the boxes with the help of our application engineers and so on. Both these places, you have to note these were modular applications, but in no manner, less complex. Then I moved to Google. I worked with the data engineering team for Google Maps, and I got exposed to these massive data pipelines. We were doing data preparation for machine learning models. We were training models. We were deploying those models, and these models were doing evaluations in real time. All of them were running on the cloud all over the world. We had 3 different DCs where our services were running in sort of a model where you have a primary DC and a secondary and a tertiary. So extremely resilient, extremely distributed. Even different components in the same call path were running in different DCs altogether. And we were not even aware of it most of the times because Google being Google, we were shielded from all the complexity, right? There were dedicated teams who were taking care of those aspects of deployment and post-deployment management. And then I moved to Flipkart and Hotstar. Nothing could have prepared me for the scale and the complexity that I saw there. We had, at Flipkart especially, we had like hundreds of microservices running tens of different types of data stores, each one of them being managed by the engineering team themselves. The developers themselves were managing them. Extremely high complexity, a lot of overhead, a lot of learning. Hotstar was sort of a step jump because we were doing all the same things, but we were not doing it in our data centers. We were not managing them. We had these cloud providers, right? AWS and GCP and others who were providing these sort of managed services. So things change a little, not very drastically, but yes, they did change a little there. So when I look back, it's like it's like complete shift from where I started to what it was in between to what it is today. It's gone through so many levels of changes.
Very, very interesting journey, Sarika, you have had. And maybe you are somebody who has been on the driver's seat of moving from one technology advancement to another technology advancement every 3 year or 4 year looks like, right? Uh, Being there, starting from something like a monolithic application development and deployment to a microservices based architectures, right? And now people have started talking about CICD, where you talked about you are actually sending software in a compact disk. That is the CD that time. And now that CD has changed to continuous delivery, right? What sort of changes, challenges, issues you have seen now? Because obviously, past nobody wants to know what sort of challenges were there, but everybody wants to know if you are managing or developing a highly complex, distributed, enterprise grade type of application where they are talking about hundreds of microservices. Uh, what sort of challenges, issues people are seeing with CI/CD development, deployment, and so on?
I think there are two set of challenges that I've seen in last few years, right? That I worked with microservices. One is there are so many moving pieces, right? When you have to do deployments, there's so many things you have to consider because you could have done the deployment of one piece, but there were others who were depending on you, and your contracts have changed somehow. Even minor changes will impact other systems, and if you don't go through the cycles of canary testing and integration testing and a lot of such things, you're bound to run into problems, right? So the complexity of doing a deployment has grown multifold primarily because there are so many moving pieces. Not the individual deployment has become easier, but the whole system you have to make sure works all together, right? So that is an added complexity. The other aspect is because it's so easy to do the deployment, the cost, at least the notional cost of doing a deployment, is so low that we have stopped thinking about quality like we used to those decades ago, right? At that point, as I said, you could not afford to make a mistake, because if you do make a mistake, you have to ship CDs all over again. It's no longer the hurdle, it's no longer a barrier, because you do a deployment within a matter of seconds and minutes at the most. And that sort of makes people think that it's okay, right? If some issue comes in, I will figure it out, I will fix it. So that has become a part of our DNA, a part of our culture, which leads to production issues coming in every now and then, regressions coming in every now and then, no matter what team, what organization, in which space we are dealing with these day in and day out.
No, yeah, very, very true, right? The kind of flexibility and the speed this particular technology change has brought in, it has also created or brought in the other added issues, challenges with it. And one of the underlying challenge, which you definitely, I completely agree to, was the quality part, right? Uh, People have started feeling, yes, I can actually, as soon as the problem comes, I will be able to fix it very fast and I can deliver it within few minutes or few seconds, right? So the aspect of quality has become a issue like that. Coming to this, the same quality part, right? That earlier, around 2000 time frame, right? There is a new sort of tool started coming out to figure out whether the quality of your application, infrastructure, deployment, and so on, how it is, and you can figure out how your application is performing and so on, right? And that's how the whole APM tool came out in picture, right? Uh, to really get a better understanding of how your application is performing, right? But then slowly this got pushed to IT operations also, because application was getting deployed, and then people want to figure out at any given point of time how this application is performing, and then if there are challenges, and then they can go ahead and fix it, right? So from that perspective, starting from a siloed monitoring of APM, server monitoring, database monitoring, people have moved to something new called observability, right? And this has also happened, like whatever you talked about, right? Starting from a monolithic based application architecture to microservices architecture. which requires more a distributed sort of tracing kind of monitoring, and that's where observability is coming in. How are engineers or developers, for that matter, have adopted various processes to make sure that their application, when they are developing or deploying, is actually more observable or more monitorable, right? I mean, somebody is able to monitor them much easier and figure out, yeah, there are challenges happening and where those challenges are. So what sort of changes developers and engineers are bringing in their day-to-day work?
Yeah, I think you're very right in saying that the world has changed, right? Because we've gone from monoliths to microservices. A side effect of that has been that it is not a single team that can do the monitoring anymore, because that single team doesn't even know what all services mean what are your critical flows. They have no idea as to whether a service is running, it is a P0 service or a P1 service or whatever else, right? So the onus of making sure that your service is up and running and is behaving as it is expected is on the team that has built the service. So it is on the developers who have built the service. So more and more what we see is every team that we work with, they have their own on-calls scheduled. The on-call is primarily responsible for the maintaining the hygiene, making sure if there are any issues coming in, they're looking into it. So as a part of that, the APM tools, all different kinds of tooling that is there, is becoming a part of their day-to-day life, right? Whether it is monitoring, whether it is alerting, whether it is looking at the logs, whether it is distributed tracing. When an issue comes in, you pretty much pull in every tool that you have in your harness and you want to deploy it to get to the fix as soon as possible, right? So these have become a day-to-day part of every developer who's working on any production system. You can no longer shy away and say, oh, my job is just to do the development and then I'll sort of throw it over the wall to the SRE or DevOps team. It just doesn't work anymore.
Very true. And the kind of complexity both underlying infrastructure and the application architecture is bringing in, it can definitely not be just given to some third party and say, boss, now you manage and maintain it, right? So coming from there, you have worked on multiple, almost like citizen scale solutions, right? Where we are talking about Flipkart or Hotstar, right? And so on. What sort of key architectural considerations these architects, the technical or principal architects who are designing some of these applications would usually have from observability standpoint?
So if let's say I'm an architect building an observability tool, of course, there are going to be a ton of functional requirements that I need to take care of, right? Along with functional, there are going to be these non-functional aspects. Scale becomes very big when you talk about citizen scale, or when you talk about scale like at which products in India operate, it's very, very high. So you have to be prepared for that kind of scale, because as I mean, it's inherent that if you're an observability tool, you'll be plugged into that system which is running at that high scale. So you have to be able to manage that. Even apart from that, I would say from the other side, when I am building a service and I want to integrate with a tool, some of the key things that I want to make sure that the tool sort of serves for me is it has to be a minimal integration requirement. If it requires me to write a lot of code to integrate with an observability tool, it becomes a blocker upfront, because I can't have all of my teams write that piece of code, spend weeks or days doing the integration. The other one is a performance overhead, especially when we are running in user path services, the services which are serving a user request in sub-second latencies. There, any overhead is not acceptable, right? Even if you are going to give me all the insights I need to debug a production issue, but if it is going to slow down my systems for my users, it just doesn't work. So I think these are the key considerations from both sides that one has to consider.
Yeah, very true. I mean, we have been talking to customers, right? And there is always a sort of debate which starts ensuing, right? That whether we should build locally, and if we are building locally, that whatever points you talked about becomes very, very critical, right? And then the second part is, should we buy it from off the shelf, right? From a OEM vendor like us, Unit, who has been actually working on a business journey observability platform. So when this build and versus buy debate is on, right, and with so many other obviously observability tools also available, What would your recommendation be to some of these enterprises out there, that how do they decide what is the right one for a specific project or application or deployment?
Yeah, thank you. I was wondering if you're going to ask me whether to build or buy. I don't want to give an answer there. It is just so contextual, right? So when you're asking me for a decision framework, that I can help with, definitely. And it is a debate that happens pretty much everywhere, and it becomes very, very passionate and heated as well. So some of the things that we look at, right, to decide which way to go. First thing is we have to write our requirements, right? We have to say what is it that we are trying to accomplish, and whether I'm going to build something or buy something, is that going to accomplish what I'm trying to accomplish? And many a times I've seen people, when they list down the requirements, they go into a far future of saying, oh, I will hit so much scale in next 6 months or next year, and hence I'm going to build for it. And sometimes it's very, very optimistic, right? And people say, oh, I may not hit it in a year, but I will hit it in 2 years. So I need to think about that scale today. My suggestion would be, think about the requirements that you know today and maybe 6 months, and be optimistic, but not overly optimistic there, right? When the things change, you can also change these decisions, and you can then again shift. The other thing is, don't miss on the non-functional requirements. Like we just talked about, what is going to be the cost of integration, what is going to be hit on my performance, and on top of that, what is going to be the cost of building and maintaining. When we say buy, it's a cost which is very, very visible, right? Because you have to pay every month or every year. But when we talk about build, we kind of assume it comes for free. That is
Right.
not true, right? Building also has a lot of cost, not just of building it at that point in time, but also maintaining it. I've seen teams where somebody decided to do sort of a build using some open source tools, and then that person left. No one else in the team knows how that thing operates. Now what do you do? So those
Right.
kind of things also have to sort of you have to keep in mind. If you're using open source, that's probably okay. If it's an open source library or a tool which people are aware of, it's fine. But if you're writing something custom, you should do it only if it's really, really necessary. So keeping these things in mind, I think laying down all of your requirements and your context, one can sort of try to make a decision. It's still going to be sort of a little, I would say, personally biased by the person who's going to do it, because it also depends on what I've done in the past, right? A lot depends on how comfortable I am with making a choice. But at the same time, by listing these things down, you can try and make the decision more objective.
Right. Actually, you're bang on. I have seen both type of customers, right? Where some customer believe that this is very critical for them. They understand it very well, and they start doing it very early on. So those places I have seen it at least quite successful, right? When they have built something themselves. But then whatever they have built is very, very attached to their business processes or their infrastructure or their application, right? Uh, I have also seen people claiming that they want to go with building the solution internally using open source, and they have tried for 6 months or almost 9 months or a year, and it has not gone anywhere. And that has happened because of various reasons. Like you said, some of them are skill problems, some of them are tool selection problems, some of them are integration problem, which you talked about, right? That which is very, very important to select. Am I able to integrate with all my other tools? Because you cannot go ahead and replace all of them because you have selected something, right? So this is very true. Now, let's say tool has been selected, and we are living in a CICD sort of world today. What do you think, from the process perspective or best practices perspective, should happen or recommend for the continuous monitoring? Because now we basically, the whole this complex environment which we have been talking about is quite volatile, right? Things keep changing. Like we discussed, people are continuously patching their application, networks are flapping, things are being moved from one VM is moving from one group to another group, and so on. So in that, what are the recommendation on the continuous monitoring part?
Yeah, continuous monitoring has to be there, right? You can't survive without it. Most teams, fortunately, unfortunately, they do realize it very early on because they run into production issues and then they realize it. Some know it upfront, and that's good. But whenever you are deploying a service, there has to be a standard set of matrices that you're going to measure and you're going to put your alerts on. You have to identify what is important to you, what is important to your business, which services are P0s within those services, which APIs are P0s, and build your alerts accordingly. But monitoring has to be pretty much on everything, right? That is one part. Another part is, while you have dashboards for, maybe you have 10 microservices, you have 10 different dashboards, you should ideally have one single point which can give you at least red lights, right? If there is something which is sort of going wrong, all of your alerting, and to be able to sort of connect the dots as to where the problem might be happening, it's good to have a single dashboard that provides you that view. Another thing is understanding wherever you are doing these sort of error handling. We tend to do that a lot. I don't expect it to fail, but if it fails, I will, emit a metrics, and then I will handle it and have sort of a degraded behavior. Most times we forget to handle, to indicate that this is a failure, because we didn't, like, our customer didn't see the failure, right? But in the system, it's a failure. Unless I emit a metric, I put an alert on it, I will never know. So these are what I call silent failures, and that they are silent unless you actually put triggers there. So that is also important. With all of this, another key thing comes is, how many alerts are you getting? Are they really useful or not? I have been in teams where on-call will keep on getting paged every hour, and then more than half the time they just acknowledge the page and that's it. And when you ask them what happened, is, oh, I know this comes every day, I know it subsides every day, so I'll just acknowledge it and I'll go forward. The effect of that is that you get desensitized to those alerts, right? You start taking them lightly. We have had a situation where, because we used to get so many pages, the on-call will put their phone on silent and go to sleep. In the middle of the night, we had a massive problem. We couldn't wake up the fellow because the phone was on silent. So be very cautious about how, like, the actual value versus noise, that segregation. Yeah.
No, I think this makes a lot of sense, because I was talking to somebody some time back, and that person was telling me that we have like hundreds of alerts, and thousands of alerts were getting generated every few minutes. And then he brought in a system that if we are not taking an action, that alert will be disabled. And after some time, they continuously disable alerts. Out of 100, only I think 5 or 6 alerts remain, which they really take action on.
Yeah,
So
those are the ones you need in your system, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. So, this alert noise or alert blasting, right, from various monitoring tools has been creating a huge problem. And that is where there are a lot of new technology. We are also working on one of the ML feature called event correlation. Can I get you one high fidelity alert out of this hundreds of alert which is coming in, so that you basically get only one actionable alert? So all the noise which you are getting is reduced. And 99% of the time, people say that, no, you please enable warning alert also, because people miss alert. So at least, if not warning critical, they will actually act upon. Right? And that increases the number of alerts which are generating. So obviously, like you said, right, that people switch off stuff and then.
Yeah, I would rather be on call where I get alerted maybe once in my stint of 1 week, and maybe never, rather than having it alert every day with non-actionable alerts.
Correct. So we have been talking about observability and monitoring and application deployment, right? And every application developer, when they are developing application, right, they'll write a lot of logs. And in a lot of conversations, people tells me, no, they have a lot of tools, but they finally go to logs to get ultimate source of truth, whether things have happened, not happened, what really happened, right? How do you see these logs basically playing a crucial role in improving this whole business resiliency and system performance? Do you still see it relevant? Do you still believe that even though we have so many other observability tools which are metric driven, logs will still basically play a role?
Logs are definitely relevant. right? There's no question about it. Logs are relevant. They are this is sort of a tool that saves your ass when things go wrong, because that's the only thing that can come in handy to actually see what had happened. But in my observation, like my experience, this is also a tool that is the most misused tool. And I'll explain what I mean by that. So I've been in the teams where you will see barely any logs because we don't want too many logs. It becomes clutter. And then there are times when you don't know what happened because the logs where they were supposed to be, they were not there at those points. They never got added. We only had logs which were very, very slim and didn't have enough information. I've also seen places where you have log line after log line after log line, and they're generating like petabytes of data, and it is useless because you can't query that data. You can't look into that data. It just is so humongous. And when you start looking at it, you can't make sense out of it because it's just all over the place. My hope is that, with the new set of tech coming in, we'll hopefully be able to manage it much, much better, because now we have the technology that can actually look into it and sort of summarize it for you, or identify what is meaningful, what is not meaningful. So it will become more useful, hopefully, with some new interventions coming in. But as of today, I feel like it's required, but there has to be a discipline as to how to use it. Because more often than not, people end up misusing it.
Very true. One of the things what we have seen is that while application might be getting only maybe 100 transactions or 200 transactions, but the amount of logs it emits is just humongous, right? I mean, and maintaining it even becomes difficult. In fact, RBI has directed banks to store logs almost for 7 years. That is what I was told some time back, that any critical application where user transactions are coming in, they have to store logs for so much time, and it's more for compliance perspective, right?
Yeah.
This is very interesting. Let's just switch gears a bit. Just wanted to get your thoughts on, you have seen 3 or 4 different advancements in application development and deployment. What future with AI, Gen AI, and so many other things coming in, what future innovation and advancements do you foresee in both application development and deployment part of it?
See, development and deployment, we are already seeing people coming up with all kinds of copilots, right? Whether it is for writing code, whether it is for generating your test cases. People are toying with the idea of generating logs automatically. They are toying with the idea of generating comments automatically, and so on. So all of these are definitely going to help, right? Because some of these things we don't think are important enough for me as a developer to do. So I would much rather sort of hand it over to an AI bot to do it, like writing documentation, writing test cases. Some of these things we don't think enough about, right? Especially when it comes to test cases. If I have to write my own unit test cases, I write 2 or 3 and then I'm done. But there might be many, many more error scenarios and corner cases and whatnot that can be auto-generated. So those kind of things are definitely going to improve our productivity a lot more. When it comes to deployments, I really hope that, we can, like we have CICDs more or less standardized now. I'm hoping the continuous monitoring, like you mentioned, right, that will also become a little standardized, because even today we see teams where it's not happening as it should be. Or the one is just doing the monitoring, the other is also understanding what has happened when a metric is off or when a trigger comes in. I think there as well, we do have tons and tons of knowledge base out in the open, or in some cases in the teams, we have tons and tons of playbooks. But at the time when an alert comes in, when I have to debug, it takes me maybe sometimes minutes and hours to figure out the right document and the right procedure to see what has actually gone wrong and what do I need to do. So some intervention there or some innovation there, I feel is going to be really, really helpful.
Correct. So you talked about 2 things in this, right? That Gen AI for Copilot, right? In fact, a few days back, I was toying with ChatGPT 4.0, and I was very surprised by me giving a prompt for generating a Python code. and it generated a Python code very well. Not only Python code worked, it basically gave exactly the same output which I was looking for. So that way, for smaller, complex problems, I believe generating code from ChatGPT 4.0 will become a norm very soon, right? Uh, so that is very interesting from the Copilot perspective, right? The second part which you mentioned is more interesting to me, which was on the continuous monitoring part, right? From the application development and deployment perspective, we have been at ViewNet talking a lot about embedded observability. What it really means is that when you have not even started writing the code for your application, but you also start thinking when it gets deployed in whatever form or fashion, how am I going to observe it, right? And during the whole application development, you basically keep developing the observability part also. For example, we talked about logs. Like you said, right? It should not be that a transaction has come and a humongous amount of logs are being thrown out, right? So the log format, log content, the traceability of your services, how do you pass trace ID from one service to another service or maybe to another application, right? What sort of infrastructure you will have. So we are feeling that now with better understanding of, boss, I have to have monitoring and observability enabled, whatever application I'm creating. Why not I start thinking it from day one? Do you have any thoughts around it?
Well, that's very interesting. Like I said, these things are going to become more and more critical, right? Even if, let's say, I start a new company today and I'm a novice engineer, I may not think about these things, but the moment my system is out in the production, the first problem hits me, I am going to realize that this is important. And from that point onwards, it is going to stay important. So it is becoming a large part of the work of all the developers, because it's rarely, that happens that you start a company and the first hit comes. That is a very small window of time and it happens only once. But after that, it is always like, that you have to be aware and you have to think about it. So it is becoming a part of each and every developer's day-to-day life. It is something which has to be solved. And it's great that you are taking leaps in trying to solve that problem. I'm sure you'll do great, and I am really excited to see how it comes out.
Thank you so much, Sarika. Just one last question, which basically I felt, given your wide range of experiences as well as you have been in the industry for so long, it would make a lot of sense for our audience to know a specific book which you always go back to, or which you would recommend, book or podcast, whatever you always go back to and listen and then get insights. Do you have any recommendations for the audience?
Yeah, when it comes to books, I am a avid reader, but I read all fiction books. When it comes to non-fiction, I pick them up only when I need it. So when at a time when I had to when I wanted to pick up about the design patterns, I picked that book. When I had to learn about any new tech stack that I was going in for. So, for example, when I moved to the chip design, I started learning about synthesis and the digital electronics. So I don't really have something that I can recommend on the tech side. On the non-tech side, I very firmly believe that there are a set of skills that everybody should learn to be successful. They are going to become more and more important. And these are what we call softer skills, right? Understanding how to work with people, understanding what influences our behavior and other people's behavior. There is a very good book called Influence. It's very, very popular book. That's what I'm reading these days, and I'm really loving it. I know there are tons and tons of book recommendations. I try to stay away from it unless you ask me for fiction. For fiction, I'll give you tons of recommendations.
Okay. And fiction, which particular author you believe is the best?
Oh, I don't do that. I get into trouble with my daughter if I pick up favorite.
Okay. 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 So thank you so much, Sarika. It has been a pleasure talking to you and getting tidbits and insights into your extremely varied and deep experience. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Bharat. It was a pleasure talking to you. It was a nice start to the morning. Thank you so much.
If you enjoyed today's episode, please consider sharing it with colleagues who have similar interest. It will help us spread the word. Discover what Sarika and her team are up to at exemplify.tech. For more information about ViewNet, please visit us at www.viewnetsystems.com.